raised garden beds versus in-ground garden beds. So there's a big debate between these two types of gardening methods. Either you plant straight into the ground or you plant into garden beds that are raised up from the ground. So there are benefits, pros and cons to each one of these different methods. A lot of people are starting to prefer raised garden beds because they are really efficient and have a lot of benefits. So one of the first benefits of raised garden beds is that you can choose exactly what type of soil goes into those beds. So when you plant directly into the ground, you have to do soil testing because maybe your native soil is not really that great for planting the things you want to plant. And if that's the case, you're going to have a really hard time planting anything and having it survive without really remediating your soil, adding things, subtracting things. When you do a raised garden bed, you don't have to do any soil testing. You don't have to worry about your native soil at all. You can just fill up the raised garden bed with whatever soil you think is best for the plants you plan on growing. That makes things very easy. You have complete control of what's in the soil, what's going to go into the soil, and pretty much how your soil will evolve over time as it continues to break down. So this makes it really easy to plant a bunch of different things and not worry so much about them dying because the soil doesn't have the proper nutrients or doesn't have the proper drainage. So you can just get that sorted out ahead of time by creating your own soil mixture, making sure it has the right fertilizer, the right composition, the right balance. So that makes it really easy in comparison to in-ground garden beds in which you have to do a lot of soil testing, and make sure your soil isn't too acidic or too basic, that sort of thing. The other benefit of raised garden beds is that it's really good for keeping weeds away. Weeds are pretty much going to invade your garden at some point, and you can make that less likely when you use raised garden beds because they're raised off of the ground where the weeds, their seeds usually are. In-ground garden beds, you really have to just rake the whole area clean. Sometimes you have to put down some landscaping fabric to block the weeds from coming through, and even then there's still a good chance that you'll end up with weeds just throughout your garden, and that can take away nutrients from the plants you actually want to grow. So avoiding that by doing raised garden beds is very beneficial because, again, they are raised from the ground, so they are not in direct contact with the surface area where seeds for weeds might be. Of course, you still might get some weeds if just the seeds happen to float through the air into your raised garden bed, but this is less likely. So that's just in general less work on your part because you won't have to be constantly monitoring your garden, looking for weeds that are sprouting, pulling them out, using herbicide or things like that. So definitely just an extra little bonus that raised garden beds have in comparison to in-ground garden beds. Now, another big benefit is using raised garden beds makes garden organization and planning extremely easy. So with in-ground garden beds, you have a lot of options, but you also are limited to where the soil is best. Maybe an area is too rocky or it doesn't have great drainage, or it's too low and it floods. With raised garden beds, you can put them pretty much wherever you want, even in areas of your property that might otherwise not be favorable for growing garden crops. And also, just the structure of any raised garden bed, because they're usually squares or rectangles, makes it very easy to plan exactly where you want to put your plants, your seedlings, and that sort of thing. And you can more easily space them, take your measurements and make sure you can fit as many plants as you safely can in a particular area so you really don't waste any space. Another benefit is that raised garden beds are really, really good if you have a bad back. If you have a bad back, you don't really want to go onto the ground where your in-ground garden bed is and have to lean down and strain your back, because that's just a good way to continuously strain your back. And if you have a raised garden bed, you can kind of determine how tall you want that garden bed to be And if you build it yourself, or even if you just buy one, there are a lot that are like pretty much at hip level. So you could just sit down on the edge of the garden bed, do some of your gardening. And if you do have to lean over, you don't have to lean over nearly as much as you would when working on an in-ground garden bed. So that's just an extra bonus for those who have bad backs or just don't want to bend down so much. Another minor but still pretty important benefit is that there's pretty much no soil compaction when you use raised garden beds versus in-ground garden beds. In-ground garden beds, you're eventually going to have to kind of get between the plants to harvest some of them. You're going to be stepping on the bed itself, and that's going to compact the soil. It could damage some of the roots underneath, it could cause maybe some drainage issues. Then you have to till the soil again. So it's just kind of a lot of issues that are really unnecessary. When you have a raised garden bed, obviously you're not going to be stepping on it. It's going to be high up, and they're going to be probably a bit narrower than in-ground garden beds. So you won't have to reach that far to get into the garden bed and harvest what you need to harvest. And again, no soil compaction. You won't have to worry so much about that, or tilling the soil or things like that. Everything will be kind of just maintained on its own, which is just more beneficial in the day of the life of a gardener. But that is pretty much my comparisons of in-ground garden beds versus raised garden beds, and the benefits that raised garden beds have in comparison to in-ground garden beds. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you did, of course, leave a like and subscribe, and I make a few videos throughout the week, so don't miss those.